Merry meet, my fellow bookish witches. Welcome to Witchy Reads, a place where we talk about books and other bookish things. Outside of the many tropes that are written to make stories more fun or enjoyable, there are also those that are meant to make readers open their minds and learn a thing or two about the world or society as a whole, to learn empathy for others. It could be about people in general, or the complicated nature of being raised in a toxic environment, becoming an adult that desperately wants to break that generational cycle. With the rise of adult children setting boundaries with toxic parents, I would imagine the generational trauma trope is about to get way more popular in literature. But how can a story convey the complexities and nuances of this trope? How can an author present it in a way that doesn't leave readers wanting to scream as memories from their own toxic family rush back to the forefront of their mind? It's complicated, and yet it needs to be a trope that readers can experience and talk about. This was the same mistake so many humans made, believing someone would leap over trauma when it hurt them badly enough. Generational trauma, or intergenerational trauma, is a relatively new area of study in psychology that deals with the transmission of trauma or its legacy in the form of psychological consequences of an injury or attack, poverty, and so forth, from the generation experiencing the trauma to subsequent generations. Basically, you have an older generation, parents, causing measurable chemical trauma in younger generations, their children, through physical, mental, and or emotional harm. This then translates into further abuse and trauma when those abused children become adults and pass on that abuse to their own children, and on it goes. A vicious cycle. The generational trauma or abusive parent trope is a great storytelling tool, a way to add more depth to characters, whether it be the main or a secondary theme of a story. This is seen many times in fairy tales or mythology, though the Brothers Grimm weren't the biggest fans of including the abusive parent trope into their stories, so it was changed to the abusive step-parent.
Kindness is free. Love is free.
Love is not free.
The concept of legacy can play an important role in a character's story, which can lead to a significant impact on their descendants. When those impacts are negative, the consequence is generational trauma. Trauma can be tricky though. Something that might seem positive on the surface may in fact be negative, which then causes that trauma to manifest. Likely, the person experiencing it won't notice, if they do at all, until it's too late. No young woman of means has gone through her entire life without at least once surveying her opportunities and wishing for a dragon instead. Someone You Can Build a Nest In by John Wiswell follows Sashishan after she is awoken too early from her hibernation by a small band of monster hunters who have entered her lair for the sole purpose of unaliving her. Normally, this wouldn't be a problem for her. At full strength, Sashishan is not a creature you would want to face, but she has been asleep all winter without sustenance, so she's not working with all her faculties. Because of this, they are able to get the drop on her and even manage to get an arrow poisoned with rosemary, her kryptonite, lodged into her vital bits. Again, this normally wouldn't be a problem because she could remove it and heal right up. But this arrow has bramble-like spikes, making it hard to remove. With the added rosemary, it is continuously pumping poison into her. Thankfully, this still doesn't prevent her from injuring one of the monster hunters and unaliving the cocky rich knight who hired them. The eldest son of the Wolfire royal family. From his bones and sinew, she takes a semi-human form. Sorry, did I not mention that Shishishan is a shape-shifting monster? She's an amorphous creature that consumes humans either from the nearby village or travelers on their way to said village and uses their remaining pieces to shift into any shape she requires.
Good for her.
Quick side note, the depictions of Shishishan shape-shifting are both grotesque and intriguing, and I adore her. We learn early on that she does try to focus her appetite on humans she considers bad. But don't confuse this spark of empathy for more than what it is. She needs you to understand that all humans are trash, at least in her mind. And she should know she's been observing them from afar for long enough. The only creatures that she considers worthy are her pet, the huge bear named Blueberry, her father, whose sole purpose was to be a nest for her and her siblings, and her mother, a mother who was taken away from her by monster hunters. It's from this point in her life that her hatred for humans had begun to manifest. I know I also mentioned her siblings. Shishishin unalived all her siblings because according to her, it was them or her.
There can be only one.
Shishishin's lair is an abandoned manor that was once one of the homes of the Wolfire family, the very same Wolfires who sent in the monster hunters to unalive her. You would be right in thinking that the fact that this family knew where to find her and seems to be determined to dispatch of her might be a problem for her. By consuming the Wolfire's son, she has been able to replenish body mass, so she can again take any shape she wishes. It also assists in her fighting against the injuries she has now sustained. She's able to remove the arrow. However, the rosemary is still poisoning her. Desperately needing sustenance to heal herself, Shishishin heads for the nearby village in the hopes of luring out an unsuspecting human to make a meal of. She does manage to find someone, a rich jock type, who boasts that he is one of the best men around and she should be so lucky as to be in his presence.
Go put $1 in the jar right now. Are you serious? Yeah!
The perfect choice for Shishishin's next meal. Unfortunately for her, the monster hunters have also returned to this village. They immediately clock that there is something not quite right with the nebulous woman in the suspicious black cloak lurking around. They reveal her. She runs because with the rosemary still poisoning her, she doesn't have the strength to fight off an entire village. They give chase, trapping her at the top of a ravine. She sustains another injury, causing her to tumble down the ravine into the river below, where the humans leave her for dead. While floating in and out of consciousness, Shishishin has thoughts of her mother, of what a terrifying monster she was, and how she has failed to live up to her name by being taken out by the humans. Surely her mother would have never gotten into a situation like this. She was everything Shishishin tries to be, but cannot manage to replicate. In her mind, her mother was perfect, and Shishishin knows she will never be able to live up to that image of her mother in her head. You could not excrete memories. They could not be surgically removed. It was unjust. She was badly designed. It's hard for children to see their parents as anything other than protectors. The problem is there are many parents who are probably still dealing with their own issues from past trauma, suffering from damage inflicted on them, or they are just villainous and were never interested in being a parent in the first place, using their kid as a means to an end. Those kinds of parents are just abusive, sadistic assholes. This abuse can manifest in a variety of ways, up to and including emotional abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse, or mental abuse. Bonus points if the parent enlists others to do the abuse for them. Ultimately, if there is a child character in this type of situation, they really only have a few options. In rare cases, the child character manages to not grow up broken, bitter, or hateful and gets out of their abusive situation. This usually leads to forming healthy relationships with others, potentially leading to the found family trope. If the child character is fed up, they could retaliate with the reason you suck speech, calling the parent out on their abusive or neglectful behavior. There's usually no hope in changing the fundamental personality of the parent with this. It is meant to be more cathartic than anything, with the child still needing some form of therapy to progress with a healthy lifestyle. The abusive parent could push the child character to the breaking point, leading to their own villain origin story, or having them fulfill the self-made orphan trope. Then there is the final option, the one where the abusive parent crosses the line, which unfortunately leads to the offing their offspring trope. She wasn't kind because of some angelic virtue. It was insecurity. It was an adaptation to cruelty. Shishishin wrapped her arms around Humley and held her to her chest for a moment, mourning the realization that she'd fallen in love with someone's pain. Shishishin wakes from her fall to find she is being taken care of by a human, Humley, who is kind, warm, and who mistakes Shishishun as a fellow human. Homely brings Shishishun back to health with meat soup and holistic remedies that she creates. Once Shishishun is healed enough to move, she and Homely return to the village. This time, Shishishun manages to keep her true self successfully hidden by using a fake name and wearing a witch's hat that Homely gave her.
It's my disguise.
But I can see your face.
Not when I do this, you can't.
It also helps that the villagers aren't interested in asking too many questions because of who Homely is. Homely is the eldest daughter of the Wolfire family. They're like local royalty. And she is here to hunt down the monster who unalived her father years ago and now has unalived her brother. Homely believes that this monster has put a curse on her family because that is what she has been raised to believe. The only way to break this curse is to unalive the monster by removing its heart. Shishishun doesn't know what to do with this information. She knows that she is technically the monster, but she didn't unalive Homely's father. That was Shishishun's mother. And she knows that neither she nor her mother put a curse on the Wolfire family. Curses just aren't in her realm of expertise as a shape-shifting monster. Shishishun ultimately decides to stick with Homely, thinking that the best way to thwart the Wolfire's monster hunting is to stay close enough to know their plans. Then the rest of Homely's family arrives.
The shoulder's frayed. Oh, it's falling to bits. It's a ridiculous old-fashioned joke.
Her two younger sisters, one an adult who would easily be classified as a bully, the other a bratty terror of a toddler. Then, of course, there's her mother, the Baroness Wolfire, the matriarch and head of the Wolfire family since her husband's untimely passing. Upon meeting Homely's family, Shishishun begins to see how different she is in comparison to them, namely that she's just kind and empathetic, the definition of a cinnamon roll. To them, she is essentially the black sheep. Can relate. They belittle, ridicule, berate, harass, bully, and abuse her, emotionally, verbally, and physically. This causes Homely to be more closed off, reserved around them, not out of respect or love, though that's what she thinks it is, but out of fear, which leads to her having crippling panic attacks on the regular. She is complacent to their every demand in the hopes of a smidgen of love from any of them. As you can imagine, this leaves her mental health in the trash. One of these demands is to create a way to lure the monster into a trap. Homely isn't a witch, she isn't magical. She's more science-minded when it comes to plants, herbs, and how best to use them most effectively for hunting and snaring animals, or in this case, monsters. During these scenes, we get clear depictions of how Homely's family treats her, immediately followed by Shishishun's internal reactions to this toxic family. Aside from reinforcing her belief that humans are flat out terrible, and her mother would never have treated her this poorly even though she was quote-unquote a monster, she also begins to feel anger on Homely's behalf. This is because Shishishun has begun to develop feelings for her. She wants to be with her, to protect her. The only thing stopping her from taking out the Wolfires is because, for inconceivable reasons, Homely still loves her family. The other issue with falling for Homely is how Shishishun's species reproduce, by laying an egg into their significant other for the offspring to eat. While Shishishun believes that Homely would make an excellent parent for their offspring because of her kindness and tenderness, in going through with this, Homely would have to die, and Shishishun isn't ready for that to happen yet. Or maybe ever. There's also the smaller issue that Homely still isn't aware that Shishishun is actually a monster. To show her love for Homely, Shishishun takes her to her lair. To make the abandoned manor acceptable for her crush, she enlists the knight she had previously tried to lure away from the village and devour to help clean her home. This is probably the most random interaction in this book, but it is so fun. Kind of a moment of brevity in the darkness of the story. The reason this relationship between Shishishun and this knight even occurs and continues is because he discovers he has an autosassinophilia kink, which basically means he gets turned on when his life is threatened.
What were you talking about?
Do that again.
What were you talking about?
He is probably the only other human besides Homily that Shishushin tolerates on a personal level. He basically becomes her assistant and is paid in threats to his life. Their relationship really doesn't serve any narrative purpose except to show how Shishushin is beginning to maybe understand and warm up to humans. While her and Homily's relationship continues to grow, Shishushin's body begins to change. Namely, that seemingly out of the blue, she begins to gain a heart. It pumps blood, it hurts when damaged, and aches for Homily like nothing else Shishushin has ever longed for. One night, after devouring some humans, Shishushin feels sick and has to remove part of her shape-shifting form. She separates herself and leaves that part of her in the basement of her lair. Soon after, back at the campground of the Wolfires, where their knights and monster hunters have set camp, a giant 3-headed deer monster attacks. Everyone is convinced that this is in fact the same monster that has been terrorizing the nearby village and placed the curse on the Wolfires. The only problem is, Shishushin was sure she was the monster they had been referring to, and this is clearly not her. Homily's younger sister is unalived during the attack, and I was flabbergasted that happened. Mostly because it was very brutal and quick. Normally a child's demise would bother me, but this child was literally Damien. We're talking spawn of Satan level evil. This world was saved from whatever that child was destined to become. Shishushin soon realizes that this monster must be the part of herself that she had left behind in her lair. It has become sentient, and now all the humans are hunting it instead of her. At first, she feels that she needs to be the one to stop it, but that quickly changes to maybe wanting to save it. Maybe she could be a kind of mother to it, with Homily, creating a family that she never was able to have by virtue of what she is and the mother who left her behind. All Shishushin could do for Homily was be patient with her and make space for her, and eventually, one day, behind her back, eat her mother. One of the most vile variations of the abusive parent is the evil matriarch. The sole purpose of this archetype is to make their child's life a living hell. Their defining characteristics are being controlling and manipulative. The evil matriarch is completely convinced that she, and only she, knows what's best for her children, even if it is to their detriment.
Skip the drama, stay with mama. Mother knows best.
She is set up to be evil in the true traditional sense. It is very rare for there to be any gray area with this archetype. When combined with the generational trauma trope, it's less about being evil to watch the world burn and more of a hurt people situation. More stories are choosing to focus on characterizations of narcissistic mothers who wield mental and emotional abuse like weapons. This archetype, combined with that trope, is particularly hard to watch play out on the page, because we readers know the one thing that the child of the evil matriarch doesn't. The evil matriarch does not love her child, and arguably doesn't even feel any kind of attachment to them. This can come off as the character being uncaring, ambivalent. The most vile, the most vicious types despise their child.
How can anyone love a pebble in their shoe?
It surprisingly can get even worse when there are multiple children and only one is singled out for the abuse, labeled the unfavorite. If the child is desperate for parental affection, this leaves them vulnerable to the escalation of the evil matriarch's abuse. If the evil matriarch happens to not be human, then you might expect her to be written as a hive queen, bending and controlling those around her to do her bidding. Of course, if she is also an actual queen in the story, then she is usually written as power hungry. There is no more deep underlying motivation. When all these storylines converge, and if the book doesn't shy away from violence, the outcome can easily turn bloody. This becomes the only outcome when the evil matriarch isn't given any redeeming qualities or any indication that she will have a character arc that turns her away from her villainy. The child character has to come to terms with the fact that their parent never loved them, and even worse, would remove them from this mortal coil if it meant the continuation of their power. It's not surprising then that many children in this situation who survive tend to pass on this trauma to their own children, unless someone or something intervenes. I created you years ago. I planted you in that shitheel barren. An ignorant person would call me your mother. Now that the Wolfires have seen what they believe is the monster that cursed them, they are more determined than ever to destroy it. It also doesn't help that they believe that the same monster has unalived two of Homilie's siblings. In this chaos, Shisheshin sees what she created, realizes she is a mom, and the motherly thing to do is to save her child. We call that growth. We call it beginning to heal, even if she isn't aware of it yet. It is in this endeavor that she discovers the Baroness Wolfire isn't who she purports to be. The truth is, the Baroness, the real Baroness, was unalived at the same time her husband was, the Baron, Homilie's father, by the monster that supposedly cursed their family. So who or what has been impersonating the Baroness? It's Shisheshin's mother, shapeshifted to look like Homilie's mother, living her best life of immortal narcissism and power. It suddenly makes sense why Homilie's mother has been so awful. She is the monster.
You want me to be the bad guy? Fine. Now I'm the bad guy.
When Shisheshin had first met Homilie's mother, she noticed that she wore a chain necklace with a trinket that looked like a jaw with metal teeth. She recognized them as having belonged to her mother. She had assumed that it was a trophy worn by Homilie's mother for destroying her. Turns out, it's a trophy to remember who she truly is. When Shisheshin sees the Baroness for who she actually is, her first instinct, after realizing everything she believed about her mother was a lie, is to find and protect Homilie. While Shisheshin does take a moment to realize that who she had envisioned and looked up to as a parental figure was a lie, instead of taking a dark turn, she turns instead to the newly created brightness in her life. While Shisheshin was never truly as monstrous as she claimed to be, it's at this point that she begins to see that clear change within herself. On the other hand, the Baroness is proud to reveal her true self to Shisheshin, as well as her ultimate goal in hunting the monster, Shisheshin, down. She is after Shisheshin's egg sac, which is the source of her immortality, kind of taking the idea that parents have a chance to live on in the people their children become to a whole other level. This is when Shisheshin realizes that what she thought was a newly grown heart is actually her egg sac. The Baroness Evil monologues for a bit, explaining that the plan is to simply take the place of one of the Baroness's children once the current body becomes too old. Ideally, it would have been the youngest, but since that's not an option now, she decides it will be Homilie. This, of course, Shisheshin can't allow. Won't allow.
Get away from her, you bitch!
She manages to get away from the Baroness with her life and goes right to Homilie's tent. Shisheshin begins confessing her love to the figure lying on the cot in the tent. Then she reveals what she is. A monster. Just not the monster. Shisheshin waits for Homilie's reply, only for the figure to sit up and reveal that it wasn't Homilie she was confessing to, but her sister, her last remaining sibling. Homilie's sister is ecstatic that the monster is here where she can dispatch her all on her own to make her mother proud. The actual Homilie then appears and her sister immediately begins berating her for not knowing all along what Shisheshin is and that she must help her unalive the monster now. Homilie pauses, contemplating her options. Just when you think she is going to do as her sister asked, she instead turns on her sister and unalives her instead. Shisheshin is shocked. Not only that Homilie saved her from her sister, but that she accepts Shisheshin for who and what she is. She also believes Shisheshin when she tells her that the Baroness is the actual monster that's been terrorizing her family. Homilie gives a quick explanation that her mother had never quite been the same since their father's death, but she had assumed it was grief, not that she was the shape-shifting monster. While this information still hurts Homilie, she agrees with Shisheshin that her mother, the Baroness, must be stopped. A trap is eventually set to capture the monster, but will it be Shisheshin or the Baroness who is caught? Ultimately, Shisheshin and the Baroness face off with each other. To protect her child, Shisheshin is left with no choice. She must destroy her mother. She does this with seemingly little emotional effort, but getting rid of a parental figure, even an absent one, is never that simple. Eventually, the emotional and mental strain will set in. After the dust settles, Shisheshin, Homily, and their child go to live in Shisheshin's old lair that has now been freshened up. Homily, trying to grapple with the aftermath of losing her entire family basically, still suffers from bad mental health. Though her panic attacks have lessened, she also allows their child to injure her while she tries to give it love and affection. Shisheshin doesn't like this dynamic and contemplates destroying her offspring for harming Homily. Homily will not hear of this though. They are family and can make it work. Shisheshin has to go back into hibernation and is worried about what will become of Homily if she leaves her with their child unsupervised. Homily promises it will be fine, and so Shisheshin hibernates. She wakes months later to find that Homily and their child have bonded. It's not perfect, but it works. Shisheshin sees firsthand how Homily's kindness is what is needed to make a change.
We must simply have courage and be kind, mustn't we?
It's still not 100% fixed, and who knows if it will ever be. They are content in this life, this perfectly imperfect life. I do not know what you call it, the thing that is not flesh or bone or organs. In the panic, I needed to make sure the greater thing was safe. The demonic laughs you make at things that are not jokes, the way you ask to touch me without words, the pleasure I get from riding next to you, the talking that I mind less than talking to others, the willingness to be harmed myself before letting you be harmed, you feeding me soup by the spoonful because I cannot raise a hand. What do you call that thing that I had to save? I had to save it. I had to save us. You are my safety. It is possible for abused adult children to attempt to cultivate healthy relationships. Sometimes they can't, but sometimes they can. If they do manage to have children of their own, the likelihood of them passing on their trauma in one form or another is still likely to occur. Trauma reactions vary from person to person, generation to generation, but often include one or more of the following: shame, increased anxiety and guilt, a heightened sense of vulnerability and helplessness, low self-esteem, depression, suicidality, substance abuse, disassociation, hypervigilance, intrusive thoughts, difficulty with relationships and attachment to others, difficulty in regulating aggression, and extreme reactivity to stress. It is likely going to be a hard, long battle to overcome any of these issues. The good thing is there are always ways to fight back and break the cycle of trauma. The first step is self-awareness, knowing that you face trauma and what effect that has had on you. From there, it is beneficial to seek professional help. Therapy is an amazing tool that more people should utilize. It can help to combat against all sorts of trauma, among other things you might have going on. Setting boundaries is also a good step. This can look different for different situations. You can choose to stay in contact with the family that caused the trauma, but with some strict ground rules. You can choose to go low contact, keeping them at arm's length, but not fully letting go. Or you could make the difficult decision to go no contact and begin the process of living your life without them. None of these options are simple, even if you have a support network to get you through this part of the process. The point is finding the right path for you and continuing working towards it no matter what shape that might take. This is how the traumatized can begin cultivating healthy habits and behaviors that will lead them to hopefully seek out healthy relationships with others. This type of healing is never an easy path with a beginning, middle, and end. Some days you will be better, rising above all you've experienced. Other days you might feel like you are starting all over and will need to remind yourself that the trauma doesn't define you. This doesn't mean you failed. It just means the road to recovery isn't easy and it will take time. It's all different shades of progress. The good news is, actively choosing every day to take the path of healing from the trauma is how the cycle is ultimately broken. Thank you for being part of the rest of my life. I don't know how to be, not yet, but I'd like to be with you. What I found most compelling about the generational trauma in Someone You Can Build a Nest In is that it clearly depicts that there is no easy fix to generational trauma. The story makes readers sit with it, in Shisheshin's disappointment at who she thought her mother was, what that means for who she will decide to be going forward, in Homily's panic attacks, and learning to rein in her eager to please bad habits. Instead, Shisheshin and Homily are given a safe space to begin healing how they want and if they choose to. They work their way through their different traumas, focusing on boundaries, consent, and love. I know I didn't touch on it before, but the fact that this is a sapphic relationship is wonderful, showing that trauma can affect anyone, any relationship. Some people might find the character of Shashishan being depicted as more human versus monster-like not that enjoyable, or what they were hoping for with this book, but I think that is a symptom of her trauma, a narrative choice, hiding who she actually is behind the mask of who she thought her mother wanted her to be. So yes, she doesn't react like a monster in most cases, but she was never really the monster anyway. Homilie's type of trauma is more common, but no less gut-wrenching, whenever she is forced to interact with her toxic family. Watching her escape from that hell was so satisfying. Yes, her family had to perish for that to happen. The hard reality is that sometimes has to happen for the healing to truly begin. The story doesn't go too much deeper into the generational trauma trope. I don't think it has to. The message was clear and direct in the writing and character representations. I rated Someone You Can Build a Nest In by John Wiswell 5 stars. I think the writing, characters, and depictions of trauma manifesting, resulting in violence, then ultimately learning to heal and receiving acceptance was beautifully handled. I also love that it was a Sapphic Monster Hunter Romance that managed to do it. Brilliant. I would love to talk with others who have read this book. Did you pick up on the generational trauma trope? It was kind of a secondary theme, not the main theme of the story. Do you think this was a good depiction of such a heavy topic and what could be argued as an interesting setting? Let me know down in the comments below. If you enjoy my videos and would like to support my channel, the best way to do that right now is to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and leave a little comment down below to let me know that you were here. It really is a big help and I greatly appreciate it. Until our next chapter together, merry part and blessed be.